Imagine waking up one day with a strange, unsettling feeling. You look at your life, your job, your relationships, your daily routines, and suddenly it all seems like someone else's creation. The goals you've been chasing, the things that make you anxious, the desires that drive you forward. Where did they come from? Are they really yours? Or have you been living according to expectations set by others, by society, by your upbringing, by the endless noise of the modern world? Think about it. How much of your identity is truly your own? How much of what you want is what you've been told to want? How often do you feel like you're just going through motions, following a script written by someone else? Most of us live this way without even realizing it. We chase happiness in the places we're told to look, in success, in possessions, in the approval of others. Yet somehow, that happiness remains just out of reach. We achieve what we thought we wanted, only to feel an emptiness, a sense that there must be something more. And there's that nagging feeling, that quiet voice asking, is this really all there is? What if I told you that one of history's most misunderstood philosophers had an answer? That nearly 2 centuries ago, a man named Arthur Schopenhauer uncovered profound truths about this very struggle? He believed that most people never truly find themselves, that they live and die as strangers to their own existence. But he also believed that there is a way out, a path to authentic living. And once you find it, that's when real life begins. Today, we're going to explore Schopenhauer's revolutionary insights into human existence. We'll uncover why he believed most people live in illusion, how our own minds trap us in cycles of suffering, and, most importantly, how we can break free. By the end, you'll understand why Schopenhauer thought that life doesn't truly begin until you find yourself. And the final realization we'll discuss is the most powerful of all. It has the potential to completely transform not just how you see yourself, but how you experience the entire world. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't your typical philosopher. Born in 1788 in what is now Poland, he was a gloomy, irritable man who kept the company of poodles rather than people. His contemporaries were optimistic about human progress and reason. They believed the world was becoming more rational, more orderly, more perfect. Schopenhauer thought they were all delusional. While philosophers like Hegel were celebrating humanity's march toward perfection, Schopenhauer was declaring that life is essentially suffering, that our deepest nature is irrational, and that the world we see is merely a veil of illusion. No wonder he wasn't invited to many parties. But there was something revolutionary about Schopenhauer's approach. He took Kant's ideas about the limits of human knowledge and combined them with Eastern wisdom from Hindu and Buddhist texts. The result was his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, published when he was just 30 years old. It was almost completely ignored at the time. Yet today, Schopenhauer is recognized as one of the most influential thinkers in Western philosophy. His ideas on the unconscious mind influenced Freud. His views on compassion and suffering inspired Tolstoy and Wittgenstein. His thoughts on art and aesthetics transformed Wagner's music. And his central insights about human existence continue to resonate in our modern world, perhaps even more now than in his own time. Because Schopenhauer wasn't interested in abstract puzzles or logical games, he was concerned with the real human experience, with suffering, desire, and the search for meaning in a seemingly meaningless world. He wanted to know, why is life so painful? Why do we keep wanting things that don't satisfy us? And is there any way to find peace? What makes Schopenhauer so relevant today is that he didn't just identify the problem, he offered a solution. He believed that beneath the chaos and suffering of everyday life, there is a deeper reality, and that accessing this reality is the key to finding yourself. But before we can talk about finding ourselves, we need to understand what keeps us lost. And that begins with what Schopenhauer called the veil of Maya, the great illusion that most of us mistake for reality. From the moment we're born, we're taught to trust our senses, to believe that what we see, is what is real. We look out at the world and see separate objects, trees, buildings, other people, all existing independently in space and time. We experience ourselves as individuals, separate from everything else, navigating through a world of distinct things. Schopenhauer said this entire perspective is an illusion. Drawing on Kant's philosophy, Schopenhauer argued that we never experience reality as it truly is. Instead, our minds organize raw sensations into the familiar world of objects in space and time. Space, time, and causality aren't features of reality itself. They're more like filters our minds use to make sense of experience. They're the software our brain runs to create a usable picture of the world. He borrowed the term Maya from Hindu philosophy, which describes the magical power that makes multiplicity appear where there is actually unity. Maya is the cosmic illusion that makes us see separation where there is connection, difference where there is sameness. Think about it this way. When you look at the ocean, you see separate waves rising and falling, but this separateness is an illusion. Each wave is just the ocean itself in motion. There is no point where one wave truly ends and another begins. It's all water. In the same way, Schopenhauer thought the apparent separation between you and the world, between one person and another, is an illusion created by our minds. This isn't just philosophical word games. It has profound implications for how we live. Because this illusion of separateness is the source of our deepest suffering. When you see yourself as completely separate from others, you become trapped in the prison of your own ego. You become consumed with protecting and enhancing this fictional self. You compare yourself to others. You crave their approval. You fear their judgment. You become enslaved to social expectations and norms. Think about how much of your life is spent trying to be what others expect. Think about how many of your desires aren't really yours at all, but were planted there by advertising, by social media, by the subtle and not so subtle messages about what success looks like, what beauty looks like, what a worthwhile life looks like. We chase phantoms our whole lives, never questioning where these ideas came from or whether they actually align with our deepest nature. We mistake the costumes we wear for our true selves. We confuse our social roles, our jobs, our relationships, our status, with our essence. And all the while, there's that nagging sense that something isn't quite right. That quiet voice asking whether this is really all there is. Schopenhauer would say, this discomfort is actually a good sign. It's your authentic self trying to break through the illusion. It's a crack in the veil of Maya. But seeing through the veil is just the first step. Because behind the world as representation, the world as we perceive it, lies something far more powerful and disturbing. Schopenhauer called it the will. Have you ever felt moments of clarity where the usual concerns that occupy your mind suddenly seem trivial? Where the roles you play and the image you maintain feel like a costume you're wearing? Have you ever caught a glimpse of something deeper beneath the surface of your everyday consciousness? These moments are precious because they're the first cracks in the illusion that keeps us trapped. They're the beginning of what Schopenhauer would call finding yourself. But what exactly are we finding when we look beneath the surface? According to Schopenhauer, when we pierce the veil of Maya, what we discover is not some peaceful, transcendent realm. What we find is the will. The will isn't a conscious thinking entity. It's not God or some divine plan. It's more like a blind, restless force that drives all of existence. It's the underlying reality that manifests itself in everything from the force of gravity to the growth of plants to the instincts of animals, and most relevant to us, in human desires and motivations. In human experience, the will appears as our desires, our cravings, our constant striving. It's that perpetual sense of wanting food, wanting sex, wanting status, wanting security, wanting more of whatever gives us temporary pleasure, wanting less of whatever causes pain. But here's the crucial insight. The will can never be satisfied. That's because it isn't rational. It doesn't have a goal or purpose. It's just endless striving. Think about your own experience. You want something, a new job, a relationship, recognition, wealth, believing it will make you happy. You struggle and strive to get it. Perhaps you succeed. There's a brief moment of satisfaction, and then what happens? The satisfaction fades, and you find yourself wanting something else, or something more. Schopenhauer described this pattern with brutal honesty. Human life must be some kind of mistake. The truth of this will be sufficiently obvious if we only remember that man is a compound of needs and necessities hard to satisfy, and that even when they are satisfied, all he obtains is a state of painlessness, where nothing remains to him but abandonment to boredom. This is direct proof that existence has no real value in itself, for what is boredom but the feeling of the emptiness of life? This is why even wealthy, successful, beautiful people often feel a profound emptiness. They've satisfied all the desires that society tells them are important, only to discover that the satisfaction doesn't last. The will simply generates new desires, new cravings, new sources of dissatisfaction. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, it never stays full. And here we face a profound problem. If the will is our essence, if this endless striving is what we fundamentally are, then how can we ever find peace? How can we ever truly find ourselves if our self is nothing but endless, unsatisfiable desire? This is the central problem of Schopenhauer's philosophy, and his answer is both surprising and radical. Because despite his reputation as a pessimist, Schopenhauer didn't believe we're doomed to endless suffering. He believed there are ways to temporarily quiet the will, to step outside its endless striving. And in these moments of stillness, we catch glimpses of our true nature beyond the individual ego. The first and most accessible of these paths is through aesthetic experience, through our encounter with beauty and art. Have you ever been so captivated by a piece of music that you forgot yourself completely? Have you stood before a painting or a sunset and felt your mind grow quiet, your usual worries and desires temporarily silenced? Have you lost yourself in the flow of creating something beautiful? These experiences aren't just pleasant diversions. According to Schopenhauer, they're moments of liberation. When we're fully absorbed in aesthetic contemplation, something remarkable happens. The will loosens its grip on us. In ordinary consciousness, we're constantly relating things to our wants and needs. We see things in terms of how they might help or harm us, satisfy or frustrate our desires. Even our perception is shaped by the will. We notice what's relevant to our wants and ignore the rest. But in genuine aesthetic experience, we temporarily step outside this self-centered perspective. We don't look at a painting and think about how much it costs or whether owning it would impress our friends. We don't listen to music calculating how it might advance our social status. In true aesthetic contemplation, we simply perceive without desire or fear. Schopenhauer called this state will-less knowing. It's a way of seeing that's freed from the distortions of our personal wants and needs. In these moments, we become what he called the pure subject of knowledge, pure awareness, undisturbed by the endless demands of the will. And in this state, Schopenhauer believed, we catch a glimpse of reality as it truly is, beyond the veil of Maya. This is why art matters so deeply. It's not just entertainment or decoration. At its best, art offers us temporary liberation from the prison of our own desires. It allows us to see beyond our narrow self-interest to something larger and more fundamental. Schopenhauer arranged the arts in a hierarchy based on how completely they could liberate us from the will. Architecture was lowest, followed by sculpture, painting, poetry, and drama. But he reserved the highest place for music. Unlike the other arts, music doesn't represent the world we see. It doesn't depict objects or tell stories. Instead, Schopenhauer believed music is a direct expression of the will itself, not as it appears in our individual desires, but in its universal essence. When we're moved by great music, we're connecting with the fundamental reality that lies beneath all appearances. As he put it, music stands quite apart from all the other arts. In it, we do not recognize the copy, the repetition, of any idea of the inner nature of the world, yet it is such a great and exceedingly fine art. Its effect on man's innermost nature is so powerful, and it is so completely and profoundly understood by him in his innermost being as an entirely universal language whose distinctness surpasses even that of the world of perception itself. But as profound as aesthetic experience can be, it has a limitation. It's temporary. Eventually, the symphony ends, the sun sets, the novel reaches its final page, and we're returned to the world of desire and suffering. Is there, then, a more lasting way to transcend the endless striving of the will? Schopenhauer believed there is, and it begins with something that might seem ordinary but is actually revolutionary: compassion. When Schopenhauer talked about finding yourself, he wasn't suggesting you should become more self-centered or self-absorbed. Quite the opposite. He believed that true self-discovery begins when we recognize ourselves in others, when we realize that the same essential reality that animates us animates everything else. This insight leads to what Schopenhauer considered the foundation of all morality: compassion. Not compassion as a nice sentiment or a social obligation, but as a direct recognition of a profound truth, that the separation between ourselves and others is an illusion. He drew inspiration from the Hindu expression tatvamasi, thou art that, which he considered the most profound statement ever made. This phrase points to the recognition that your own essence is identical with the essence of all beings. The same force that drives you, the will, drives everyone and everything else. When someone suffers, it's not their suffering versus your comfort. At the deepest level, there is only suffering. Period. And when you truly understand this, compassion isn't something you practice. It's something that happens naturally. Schopenhauer wrote, "My own true inner being actually exists in every living creature as truly and immediately as known to my consciousness only in myself." This realization, for which the standard formula in Sanskrit is tattvam asi, is the ground of compassion upon which all true, that is to say, unselfish, virtue rests, and whose expression is in every good deed. This perspective cuts against our usual way of thinking about morality. Most ethical systems are based on rules or principles. You should do X, you shouldn't do Y. But Schopenhauer argued that true virtue doesn't come from following rules. It comes from a direct insight into the nature of reality. When you see through the illusion of separateness, you no longer need rules to tell you to care about others. You care about them because at the deepest level, they are you. Their suffering is your suffering. Their joy is your joy. Think about what happens when you see someone suffering and feel genuine compassion. In that moment, the boundaries between you and them blur. You forget your own separate interests. Their pain becomes your concern not because you've calculated some benefit to yourself, but because the division between their pain and your concern has momentarily dissolved. Schopenhauer saw in these moments of compassion a temporary transcendence of the individual will. When you act from genuine compassion, you're no longer driven by personal desire or fear. You've stepped outside the endless cycle of wanting and temporarily freed yourself from the tyranny of the will. And here we encounter a fascinating paradox. You find yourself by forgetting yourself. The more you transcend your narrow self-interest, the closer you come to your true nature. Modern psychology has started to catch up with Schopenhauer on this point. Research shows that acts of kindness and generosity activate pleasure centers in the brain, reducing anxiety and depression. People who volunteer regularly live longer and report greater happiness. Compassion meditation increases positive emotions and social connection. What science is now proving through experiments, Schopenhauer intuited through philosophical reflection. Compassion isn't just good for others, it's good for us. It's a pathway out of the prison of the ego and toward a more authentic existence. But profound as this insight is, Schopenhauer didn't stop there. He believed there was an even more radical way to transcend the will and find our true nature, a path followed by saints, ascetics, and mystics throughout history. It's his most challenging idea, but also potentially his most liberating. Are you ready to explore the ultimate solution Schopenhauer offered to the problem of existence? It's not an easy path. It challenges our most basic assumptions about what makes a good life. It flies in the face of everything our consumer culture tells us to value. But for those willing to consider it, it offers the possibility of the deepest freedom. I'm talking about what Schopenhauer called the denial of the will, a profound shift in our relationship to our own desires and to existence itself. Throughout history, in different cultures and religious traditions, there have been individuals who seem to transcend ordinary human concerns. Think of Buddhist monks who renounce all possessions, Christian ascetics who retreat to the desert, Hindu sadhus who abandon conventional society. These figures have always fascinated and perplexed the mainstream culture. Why would anyone choose to give up the pleasures and comforts that most people spend their lives pursuing? Schopenhauer found in these ascetic traditions a profound wisdom. He believed these individuals had recognized a fundamental truth, that attachment to desires is the source of suffering, and that true freedom comes from breaking the cycle of wanting altogether. Let's be clear about what this means. Schopenhauer wasn't suggesting we all become monks or hermits, and he certainly wasn't advocating for suicide or self-destruction. In fact, he explicitly argued that suicide doesn't solve the problem of the will because it's often motivated by the will itself. Someone who commits suicide doesn't want to stop wanting. They want their specific suffering to end. The denial of the will isn't about destroying yourself. It's about transforming your relationship to desire. It's about recognizing that your deepest identity isn't your individual ego with its endless wants and fears, but something more fundamental that transcends individuality altogether. Schopenhauer described this state as the complete silencing of the will. When this happens, he wrote, "There appears to us, instead of the restless pressure and effort, instead of the constant transition from desire to apprehension and from joy to sorrow, instead of the never satisfied and never dying hope that constitutes the life dream of the man who wills, that peace that is higher than all reason, that perfect calm of the spirit, that deep rest, that inviolable confidence and serenity." This might sound mystical or abstract, but Schopenhauer was describing something real, a state of consciousness that humans have accessed throughout history. We might call it enlightenment, awakening, or self-transcendence. It's a radical shift in perspective where you no longer identify with your individual personality and its desires, but with the universal reality that underlies all existence. When this shift happens, your relationship to suffering changes dramatically. You still experience pain, but you no longer add the extra layer of suffering that comes from resistance, from the mind's endless commentary of, "This shouldn't be happening," or "I can't stand this." You still act in the world, but your actions are no longer driven by personal craving or fear. Instead, they flow from a recognition of the underlying unity of all things. The compassion we discussed earlier becomes not just an occasional feeling, but a constant state. And most remarkably, your relationship to death transforms. The fear of death, Schopenhauer argued, comes from our identification with our individual selves. When we recognize that our deepest identity is not our personality, but the universal will that manifests in all things, death loses its sting. The individual dies, but the essential reality continues. As Schopenhauer put it, if we were to conduct to the gates of death the convinced adherent of a religion promising eternal life, and also a man who does not believe in survival in any form, we would observe no difference in their behavior. Or if there were any difference, the advantage would be on the side of the man who accepted that his existence was about to cease completely, rather than the one who still harbored some vague hopes. This perspective echoes the Buddhist concept of anatta or no self, the idea that our sense of having a permanent, separate self is an illusion, and that recognizing this illusion is the key to liberation from suffering. It also resonates with mystical traditions across cultures that speak of unitive experiences where the boundary between self and other dissolves. Modern neuroscience has begun to explore these states of consciousness. Research on long-term meditators shows distinctive brain activity during experiences of self-transcendence. Psychedelic research is uncovering how certain substances can temporarily disrupt the brain networks responsible for maintaining our sense of separate selfhood, leading to profound mystical experiences that participants often describe as more real than real. Far from being outdated mysticism, Schopenhauer's philosophy anticipated discoveries that science is only now beginning to confirm. That our ordinary sense of having a separate, independent self is a construction of the brain, and that there are ways to experience reality beyond this construction. This is the ultimate revelation of Schopenhauer's philosophy, that finding yourself doesn't mean strengthening your ego or fulfilling all your desires. It means recognizing that your deepest identity transcends individuality altogether. It means seeing through the illusion of separateness to the underlying unity of all things. And when this happens, life truly begins. Not the life of endless wanting and temporary satisfactions that most people experience, but a different kind of life, one characterized by peace, compassion, and a profound sense of connection to all existence. So, how do we apply these abstract philosophical ideas to our everyday lives? How do we begin the journey of finding ourselves in the Schopenhauerian sense? The good news is that we don't have to become hermits or ascetics to benefit from Schopenhauer's insights. There are practical steps we can take right now to begin seeing through the veil of Maya and quieting the endless demands of the will. First, we can cultivate awareness of the illusion. Start paying attention to how much of your life is driven by desires that society has implanted in you. Notice how advertising manipulates your wants. Observe how social media creates artificial cravings for validation and recognition. Question whether the goals you're pursuing are truly yours, or whether they've been scripted for you by your culture, your family, or your peer group. This critical awareness is the first step toward freedom. As Schopenhauer put it, every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. By expanding your field of vision, by questioning your assumptions about what you want and why you want it, you begin to create space between yourself and your desires. You start to see that you are not your wants. You are the awareness that observes those wants. Second, make space for aesthetic contemplation in your life. Spend time with art that moves you deeply. Listen to music with your full attention, not as background noise while you scroll through your phone. Stand before great paintings or natural beauty and allow yourself to be fully present with the experience. These moments of will-less knowing give us our first taste of freedom from the endless cycle of desire and satisfaction. Third, practice compassion, not as a moral duty, but as a way of recognizing the underlying unity of all beings. When you see someone suffering, allow yourself to feel their pain. When you encounter someone different from yourself, look for the common humanity beneath the surface differences. Regularly ask yourself, how would I feel in their position? This simple exercise begins to dissolve the illusion of separateness that keeps us trapped in ego. Fourth, explore practices that quiet the mind and weaken identification with the individual self. Meditation, mindfulness, and contemplative prayer all have this effect. They create space between you and your thoughts, between you and your desires. In this space, you begin to sense something deeper, the pure awareness that underlies all your experiences. And finally, practice non-attachment. This doesn't mean not caring or not enjoying life's pleasures. It means holding those pleasures lightly, enjoying them while they last without clinging to them when they're gone. It means recognizing that happiness doesn't come from getting what you want, but from freedom from the tyranny of wanting itself. Modern mindfulness teachings often repeat the phrase, "You are not your thoughts." Schopenhauer would add, "You are not your desires. You are not your fears. You are not your social role or your possessions or your achievements. You are something far deeper and more fundamental, the clear awareness in which all these things appear and disappear." The journey to finding yourself in this way isn't easy or quick. It goes against everything our consumer culture teaches us. It challenges our most basic assumptions about who we are and what makes a good life. But the reward is a freedom and peace that no amount of worldly success can provide. As Schopenhauer himself put it, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." So now the choice is yours. Will you continue living according to the script society has written for you, chasing desires that can never fully satisfy you? Or will you begin the journey of finding yourself, of seeing through the illusion of Maya, quieting the endless demands of the will, and discovering the deeper reality beneath the surface of ordinary consciousness? Because Schopenhauer was right. Life doesn't truly begin until you find yourself, not the self that wants and fears and compares itself to others, but your true self, the pure awareness that transcends individuality and connects you to the essence of all existence. The journey begins with a simple recognition that there's more to you than you've been led to believe, that beneath the noise of everyday consciousness, there's a stillness waiting to be discovered. And in that stillness, you'll find what you've been looking for all along, not in some distant future or faraway place, but right here, right now, in the depth of your own being. Thanks for listening.